Hi, Joseph Gregory-Hallett here, Wednesday the 2nd of August 2023. I'm having a clear out and I'm just clearing up some things which happened during the Hidden King of England interviews in June 2020 during the lockdown. So I did an interview on the Charlie Ward show with Dave Mahoney, and then he offered to come over and film me. When he came over, the first thing I did was ask him, "Are you a heroin trafficker?" And he looks sideways and he goes, "No," because it was cocaine. Apparently, he was flying cocaine from Colombia into North America, and he's banned from North America. I didn't know that particular detail at the time, but I was told it by a close associate of his. So we did the filming, and at the same time, I was getting my website developed by Lee Hemington, who described himself as Charlie Ward's bitch. Uh, so Lee Hemington says that he could do the website in 5 days. So he turns up 4 days later and he's got a copy of a website from someone else. And after a month of not producing a website and him copying other people's websites without my colors on it and without my name and details on it, I found out that he'd never actually built a website and that he was hiring Indians in India to build the websites. And they have CIA backdoors on them, so that was no good. So I had a friend build the website for me, which was great. Otherwise, you wouldn't see any of this or any of my material from me. Lee Hemington's a Maori, but he's never been to New Zealand. Um, and he took all of my list of people and gave it to Charlie Ward, which is about 25,000 people. I never got anything for that. And Charlie Ward launched himself on the basis of my interviews, and I never got anything from that. And Charlie Ward launched a fundraiser in my name, Greg Hallett, and raised 1,768 euros before we noticed it, and then noticed him, and then immediately he took that money out of the account and stopped it. But he had another 150,000 euro fundraiser in my name ready to go. And then he got all these scurrilous people on his site to defame me once we'd done the interviews, because Charlie Ward is an agent of Prince Charles, and Charlie Ward spent a year or so in a kibbutz when he was 20 in Israel, so he's a Mossad asset. So, um, did the interview with Dave Mahoney at the 1922 Club, which Jack Kidd had organised, and the 1922 Club is in North Norfolk, and it is where the next Prime Minister of the UK is decided. So that was kind of interesting. And there was a guy there fixing the internet in the house, which should have taken half an hour, and he was there from 8 a.m. till midnight, and then the next day from 8 a.m. So there's a lot of spying going on. So I did the interview with Mahoney. Mahoney didn't know my material at all, and said he had developed digital media productions, but that actually only started a week or 10 days prior. So he was completely new to it, and he's completely new to my material. So when we did the interview, he didn't know what to ask. So I ended up doing the entire interview myself, and then he inserted questions later on and got the credit for such a great interview. Right, so we do the interview, and then so there's part one and part two, and I think it went up to part six. I didn't watch the last ones, five and six. They were about them. So what they'd done is they'd seconded the title, The Hidden King of England, and then used it for themselves, and it wasn't about me at all. And one of them, they said, what are we going to do for all the poor people? And they were staying in a friend's, or filming it in a friend's, very rich friend's mansion in Spain. And it wasn't about me at all, but they were using my title. So they were identity thieves, really. And then Mahoney was supposed to send me the videos before it went out so that I could watch it and then do edit recommendations. So what Mahoney was doing, this is Dave Mahoney, but his actual name is David George O'Mahony, O apostrophe M-A-H-O-N-Y, no E. What David George O'Mahony was doing was putting the videos up on his website so that people could watch them. And then after half an hour, he was sending them to me. And then I was watching them and doing edit recommendations and then sending them back to him. So he'd get the recommendations about 2 hours after the video had gone up. And then he would, so he would get, let's say, 50,000 hits, and I'd get, let's say, 10,000 hits. So they were basically stealing my intellectual property. And to this day, their numbers are really high and my numbers are now really small. So now, because Dave Mahoney is catch and release, that is, he's done the crime. He's also done real estate crimes, like selling real estate from Spain, selling real estate in Brazil for timeshares on land that couldn't be built on. And one guy was complaining he'd lost 100,000 euros in that deal. And then Mahoney's wife and 2 daughters had left him because he's so shady. They moved to Seville. And then Mahoney is living from apartment to apartment, sometimes 3 apartments a week, on the absent real estate places that he's trying to sell. And then there's this woman in Scotland who gave us all some neck jewelry with really nice detailed work on it. His name's Catherine from Scotland. And Jack Kidd got them first because he lived near her, and then he gave them all to me to post out to everyone else. And all of them refused to give me their home addresses, so I couldn't send them to them, and I've still got them because they were doing a shady deal. They were planning to shaft me from the beginning. So all the videos went out. The first one was good because it was all me talking, and the second one was okay. It was an interview and a bit of a chat, and then they got more and more and more about, like, Mahoney sitting in the basement amongst all these cars saying how wonderful he is, and it just got completely off track. And it was obviously a piece of identity theft, and friends of mine who watched it, they went, this is just terrible, you know. And I was actually in shock about it. And then, to prove that they were deep state agents, they then interviewed people who I hadn't seen for 4 decades as though they knew me. And one of them they interviewed was my so-called sister. I don't believe she is. I think she's adopted, called Mandy Hallett. We call her the fishwife. And now she calls herself Amanda Marie Pink. And she was possessed, right? And then a lot of the people in counterintelligence are actually possessed and involved in possession. There's a whole group of people who are possessed on the internet, and they all work together. So they got Mandy Hallett, or Amanda Marie Pink, to talk against me, and as though she knew me. And we had kicked her out of the family in 1973, about the same time that the Exorcist movie came out, for being possessed and trying to stab me in the forehead, boom, with a pair of dressmaking scissors. And just as the knife blade's coming in, my brother grabbed her wrist and pulled it away. So that was enough for all the kids to report it to the parents. And I heard the parents, my father, saying to my mother, look, she's going to kill him. We have to get rid of her. So we boarded Mandy Hallett, the fishwife, out in a house about a mile away. And then we sold the house, which was a really nice 5-bedroom house in a really nice area with a big garden and 9 full mature 70-foot trees right next to the school. And we moved 5 hours drive away in Tauranga, and we didn't see her for 10 years. And then since 1973, I've seen her a few times. I haven't seen her for 4 decades. So she was a really unreliable witness, but Charlie Ward was promoting her because she was talking so vociferously against me. Just she was saying her faults and then projecting them onto me. And Charlie Ward was working for Prince Charles, who's part of the fake British royal family, who are absolutely fake, with a fake crown, fake orb, fake sceptre, and they're not the monarch of the English people. They're not the monarch of the British people. They're not the monarch of England. They're not the monarch of Britain. They're not the monarch of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. They're not the monarch of the land. They're not the monarch of the people. They're the monarch of dolphins and swans. And after 3 days, their title actually goes to the chair of the estates. And I'd offered Charles, I wrote to Charles and said, look, I've got the coronation stone. Dug it up in Scotland at the predicted location on the old maps and on the predicted date. And Charlie refused to use the correct coronation stone because he's scared of two things. One is the mob, and the other is the wrath of God. And because Charlie knows that he's from a British royal family that's been fake since 1603, and Scotland fake since 1582, 1583, and fake since 1566 and 1567, he knew that he could not sit on the real coronation stone, so he avoided it. So I've got the real coronation stone, and I've still got the claim to the throne of England, the land, and England, the people, and King of the English, and King of the Irish, and King of the Scottish, and King of Scots, and King of Scotland, and King of Ireland. Of course, Charlie Ward wanted to suppress that, so he engaged my sister, or my non-sister. I think she was adopted. And here's how the adoptions went. In the late 1950s, when she was born in 59, in the late 1950s, very few people owned their own houses, but the New Zealand dollar was worth $2 because New Zealand was producing all the wool for the uniforms for the Korean War and the Vietnam War. So there was a big move at the time from the country into the cities, and we lived at the bottom of a street that ended in a farm gate and next to a farm, and they were spraying 2,4,5-T or DDT or Agent Orange, and Agent Orange was named after Prince Philip's Dutch bum buddy. Prince Reinhold, I think it is. So what that DDT was doing was causing a lot of defects. Plus, the orphanages were full. The orphanages were a real thing. They were a big thing. And so what they did is, and they were just introducing foster homes. So what they did was, with the stillbirths and the stillborns and the faulty births, they would replace the stillborn child with one from the orphanage. And so I think Amanda Marie Hallett or Mandy Pink was an orphan child from that. And I think my young sister's the same. I don't think I'm related to either of them. And neither of them look like my mother. I'm actually the only one that looks like her. I don't have anything to do with her because of all of this interference, right? So I was the target of this because I'd been born at a certain time in a certain place. I was born at Rosh Hashanah. I was born in 1961, Rosh Hashanah, which is the 10th to the 15th of September. And I was born in a manger, which is a manger is a crib or a cottage. And the hospital that was built on Warkworth was this massive Roman-sized building, but it was called cottage. So I was born in a cottage in Rosh Hashanah, which put me on the list for possibly fulfilling the prophecies. And that had to be after 7 years of predicted events, which was drought, which was the 1954 droughts in America. And then there was famine, and the famine of 20 million died in China. And then there were a couple of even years in between. And then there was dread of war, which is 1960, and then threat of war, which is 1961. So when my sister, who's a multiply possessed entity, when she turned 2 years old, the Berlin Wall went up, and 33 days later, I was born, and it was my job to drop it. So I did all these things like, got picked up by Coca-Cola, came out to New Zealand and identified me and picked me up, and then went to America, and Turkey was training ground for the Eastern Bloc, and then went to the Eastern Bloc, and blah, blah, blah. Did all that. I'll tell that story another day. So we've got this possessed entity, Amanda Pink, and she was projecting of being interviewed on the Charlie Ward show and got about 60,000 hits. And they didn't question her to check if she was absolutely lying or not. And I was in shock over this. I heard the first of it, and I'm going, oh, it's just absolute lies. And she was saying that I had abandoned my daughter. In actual fact, she had abandoned her daughter. She gave birth, and when the daughter was 1, she abandoned the child on a 9-year drinking and drug-filled binge. She's a heroin user, massive drug user, massive alcoholic, and then projected that onto me. Whereas I had spent 8 years in the family court, and I won custody, and my child lived with me, and I was a solid dad and raised a family. And I also started a charity called Fathering New Zealand, and wrote a book called Are You My Father? The Family Court and Other Experiments, and exposed the family court as a feminist, socio-engineering, child sex abuse, pedophile racket, where they would try, and the Catholics running it, the Catholic Inquisition running it, would try and take all of the houses and all of the estates and all of the money and all of the businesses and all of the income and even the life of the father before they would hand over the child for custody. So they were basically stealing children and selling them back to the father. And there was the KGB gangbang prostitute Margaret Wilson, who was a one-legged prostitute in St. Petersburg in 1987, and actually put out a press release saying New Zealanders need to spend more face-to-face time with the Russians. I actually went to Moscow and interviewed the KGB a month after the Berlin Wall came down, and they told me personally that the Tavistock in Russia was, especially in St. Petersburg, was training New Zealand and Australian women. And what they're training them in was the Jesuit thing of no values to take over the world, right? Jesuit program is no values to take over the world. So what we're seeing now with anything except heterosexuality, like, with transvestite stuff and cross-dressing and trannies doing children's storybook reading in primary schools, all of that's about no values, which is about basically white men won't fight for their countries because there's no patriotism, there's nothing to fight for because there's no values, and that's their goal. The goal of the Jesuits is that they can take over countries through no values, including the crown and monarchy of United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, which is being taken over by no values, as we saw with Queen Elizabeth II, who fronted as values and didn't, and with Prince Charles, who has no values and fronts as having no values, and has even created the WEF, World Economic Forum, and he's appointed the cross-dresser Klaus Schwab, who wears a tutu with angel wings and a big belly sticking out and wanders around on the beach looking like the weirdest thing you've ever seen, to represent no values, so that no one will challenge Charles about his complete no values. And then Charlie Ward had on the show the head of the Catholic Inquisition in New Zealand, Paul Gagan, and the guy who was behind Centrepoint, Roger Douglas, right? Now, the head of the Catholic Inquisition in New Zealand, Paul Gagan, just happened to be the lawyer for the child acting against me. And I just happened to be the second case of protection orders, a bit like I was being targeted. And the first case of the protection orders, they just let the guy flow right through. And then the second case, they threw everything at him. So they threw absolutely everything at me for 6 years. So protection order meant you couldn't see a child for 6 months. Protection order meant that you had to have therapy, which was a joke. I actually paid the psychologist a little bit extra. We had a great time. We discovered all sorts of stuff. It was great. It's great. So they really targeted me for 6 years. Like, it was basically like having a 6-year-long interrogation in an East Berlin cell during the Cold War, right? So, and Paul Gagan, who's the head of the Catholic Inquisition in New Zealand, he went on the Charlie Ward show and he said that I didn't win custody and I'd abandoned my daughter, which is absolute lies. I won custody, I beat Paul Gagan, I raised my daughter, and 2 weeks after beating Paul Gagan and winning custody, Paul Gagan nominated himself as a judge. No one else did. And I heard the lawyers talking about it, that no one had nominated Paul Gagan as a judge. And Paul Gagan was a Roman Catholic and a Freemason, and he belonged to the same lodge as Grant Hazelby, who became the head of the Disputes Tribunal. Now, Grant Hazelby was my parents' lawyer, and he used to hide at my house when I was 17 and stalk me as a teenager. And when I came home from school and got off my bike, he'd run across the house, open the ranch sliders and look out, look at my ass coming off the bicycle. He was a creep. And then he drank my father to death. Like, he's about 10 years younger than my father, and he's always around there at like 3 in the afternoon till about 6 at night, drinking. And my father actually died of alcoholism. And then Grant Hazelby spoke at the funeral and he said, Des is dead. Right? It was like a Catholic hit on a non-Catholic. I go, Protestant, but Des wasn't into he wasn't into religion at all. He's one of its biggest critics, and good on him. Grant Hazelby then came around to our house in 1986 and admitted to sexually abusing his daughter Caroline in front of my mother, and my mother went shh and indicated for me to leave the room, but I sort of hung around in the hallway and I heard him talking about it. And because Paul Gagan had sexually abused his daughter, he was on catch and release. And because he was a Catholic who was a Freemason, Catholics were allowed to become Freemasons from January 1980. When Grant Hazelby became a Freemason, he was automatically a Jesuit. And then when he did the catch and release thing, or when he did the crime against his daughter Caroline, he became catch and release. So he was actually fully a Jesuit, and he's fully on the Jesuit agenda. So then, so he was living at 4th Ave, and I just happened to be standing at the top of his driveway when he came back from his initiation. Woohoo! And then was having a barbecue there, because in those days when you had someone who was a bit strange like Grant Hazelby, a crooked mouth, his mouth was like that, it's on an angle like that. And he's born New Zealand's hairiest baby. So he's a bit weird. His mother wanted to kill him, smother him with a pillow when he was born. He's a bit weird. But he'd go around there. And I had my first initiation into the Egyptian mysteries in early January 1980. And then, so I'm standing at his place, and we just say he's a bit queer. And there's all these lawyers there. And they've got a bear in a hand, a steiny in a hand, lawyers and accountants. And they all stand around in a circle and point at me and go, haha, you're the fool. There's 2 people who can become the King of England. One is the fool and the other is the joker. And Francisco Manuel is known as the joker, which kind of made me the fool. Not so bad being the fool, because you actually get all the secrets. People talk to you as though nothing's going to happen with the information, but here I am relaying it to you. So what we're looking at with this queer Grant Hazelby as head of the Disputes Tribunal, he's deputy head from 1993 to 99, and then head of the Disputes Tribunal from 1999 to 2005. And the first thing he did was introduce other. So you fill in the form and it's male, female, other. So he was on the feminist agenda. And the feminist agenda was being created by the one-legged gangbang prostitute in St. Petersburg, Margaret Wilson. And Grant Aisby lived in 4th Ave in Tauranga. Margaret Wilson lived on about 23rd Ave, right? So back in 1980, before Margaret Wilson was Attorney General in 1999, they already knew that she was going to be the Attorney General. So all the lawyers who are really solicitors, who are really just prostitutes, and they prostitute themselves, they drove as fast as they could to Margaret Wilson's house to offer to do the nastiest things and whatever she wanted for that promotion. So when they did get promoted, they were bound to do the most nasty things. And one of those nasty things was attacking me, right? Because I was born Hamashiach, you know. I was born in a manger. I was born at Rosh Hashanah. I was born in the predicted year. I was born 33 days after the fall of the Berlin Wall, which I was there at the time. You know, I was actually in Buddha when it fell, Buddha in Budapest, and I had CIA contacts and KGB contacts, and I was skipping through Checkpoint Charlie between the two. Had a girlfriend on either side. Yeah, so and then I was in Moscow interviewing the KGB. So the thing about New Zealand is, when you've actually achieved something overseas and you go back to New Zealand, they hit you hard. They don't want you to tell anyone, because they want to keep New Zealanders, Kiwis, stupid, as ignorant as possible. And Kiwi stands for keen interest without intelligence, and that's the way they want it. Right, so when Paul Gagan, head of the Catholic Inquisition in New Zealand, and Roger Douglas, former Minister of Broadcasting and former Minister of Finance, were on the Charlie Ward Show talking against me, it was a continuation of malfeasance, and it was also a breaches of estoppel by negligence, getting the information wrong, estoppel by representation, and estoppel by misrepresentation, because they were the guilty parties. They were attacking me with fictitious lies, which is a fraud. It's them holding official positions. It's malfeasance, and also misfeasance and nonfeasance, if you want to go there. And estoppel by negligence, estoppel by misrepresentation, and estoppel by representation. Now, during that interview, Roger Douglas tried to blame Centrepoint on me. Now, he was one of the people behind it. Centrepoint was created by Bert Potter, but the two people behind it were Roger Douglas and Peter Williams. And Peter Williams was Prince Philip's agent in New Zealand, and he was the biggest heroin trafficker in New Zealand and Australia. And he was Mr. Asia. Peter Williams, Peter Eldridge Williams, QC, president of the Law Society of New Zealand, was Mr. Asia. He was the biggest heroin trafficker in Australasia, New Zealand, and Australia. And Peter Williams was a homosexual pedophile. And I used to play tennis with him before I knew he was the mafia boss, when I thought he was president of the Law Society. And I also went sailing with him from the 28th to the 31st of August 2004. Also, when I thought he was an honourable man and the president of the Law Society, but he was Mr. Asia and the biggest heroin trafficker in the country. And the guy who actually physically trafficked the heroin and sold it was Terry Clark, and his girlfriend, Peter Williams was Terry Clark's lawyer, and Peter Williams' junior lawyer, Karen Sowich, was Terry Clark's live-in girlfriend, especially in London. So they were trafficking the heroin in New Zealand, in Australia, especially Sydney and Melbourne, and then in London. And he admitted on his yacht Ariel, AERIAL, single masted ketch. We sailed from Auckland from the Auckland Harbour, main Auckland Harbour, to Great Barrier Island, where we met his son who lived out there. That was a place for drug drops, and then back again. And the other person who was behind Centrepoint was Roger Douglas, who was charged by he was the Minister of Broadcasting, first of all, in the early 1970s. And he was dealing drugs to children through Radio I, and then that was going to Barbara Allpress. And then Barbara Allpress was giving it to Michael Allpress, who would deal drugs to my brother from the age of 9, right? And they're training my brother up to be a drug dealer. And then Peter Allpress was my age, and he was trying to get me into drugs from the age of 12. That didn't work. And they had this big Jimi Hendrix poster, about 2.5 meters by 2.5 meters, big Jimi Hendrix poster in the back lounge, and a huge spiral. And they were quite predictive, though. They actually said that I would talk about this when I was about 61. They actually, 61. So, it's kind of interesting. So Roger Douglas was Minister of Broadcasting, and he was trafficking heroin to children, and he was also sodomizing 12-year-old boys in the late 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s. And then in 1999, his stepson took him to court, and Roger Douglas was convicted of pedophilia, and he got a traffic ticket and a knighthood, became Sir Roger Douglas. And Peter Williams, just before he died, about 6 weeks before he died, he was given rapid cancer because I was exposing him as a heroin trafficker and a homosexual and pedophile, which I'd accused him in a book. And he was taking me to court to try and disprove it, but he actually admitted to it. He admitted to being Prince Philip's agent, and he admitted to being a homosexual. And then what the court did was suppress all my information and attacked my car outside the court. 6 detectives attacked it, broke the mirror off, broke the wiper blades off, and blocked it with a motorcycle. And then that was $130 to fix that. And then what did they do? Oh yeah, my child and her mother and her boyfriend and his son were in Western Samoa in late August 2009, and they used Operation Sea Lion and blew up the fault line to create a tidal wave. And they were staying at a bore on the beach, and there was this 14-year-old kid walking on the beach, and he was doing tsunami watch, and he yelled out, "Tsunami, tsunami!" So they all just ran out of their beds and ran along the beach about 200 meters, and then ran through the gates, like this actually, through the gate of the hotel, and then it's about another 400 yards, and then a really steep bank, and then a road on the top. So they got along the beach, and they ran through there. They got about 80 yards through there, and then they got hit by this tidal wave that was 4 meters high, doing 40 kilometers an hour, full of broken bits of wood, metal, and trees, and sand, and grit, and stones, and that. And my daughter she was under it, and she got pinned against the blue car. I'm talking about mass murder here. Pinned against the blue car, and relaxed and gave up to die. And her last thought was, "Oh, so my last thought is a blue car." And when she relaxed into death, she floated, because when you relax in the water, you actually float, and when you're stressed, you sink. So she got to the surface, she jumped on a pile of floating debris, and then from there jumped onto a palm tree and was on the seaward side of the palm tree, all just covered in bruises. Like, she's blue, black, brown, yellow, green, just bruised all over the place. And then they yelled at her to get around the leeward side of the tree, and then they waited for the second wave to come. And then when that receded, they all carried on running up to the bank. And then there are all these ghosts, like naked people, maybe some torn underwear, walking through the bushes to all these people driving to work. And it was like just a ghost town of these like zombies walking through the wood. And then cars stopped and took everyone to the hospitals. 2 of the hospitals were completely destroyed, and there were 2 that were okay. 850 people got killed in Western Samoa on that day, on that morning. And my daughter was the target. And then the New Zealand Herald photographed my daughter's pink bag and had it right smack bang center of the New Zealand Herald front page, as though they were telling me that if you keep exposing Peter Eldridge Williams QC as a homosexual pedophile and the head of the Mr. Asia heroin trafficking syndicate, this could happen to you. And then because it's on the same fault line in Indonesia, within 40 hours of an earthquake in Samoa, there's an earthquake in Indonesia. And exactly 24 hours later, there was an earthquake in Indonesia that caused a tidal wave, and another 1,150 people were killed. So these people had killed 2,000 people trying to kill my daughter to send me a message not to expose Peter Eldridge Williams QC as a pedophile, homosexual, heroin trafficker, Prince Philip's agent. And all of this was suppressed in the Charlie Ward show, right? Just never got a mention. So what happened then? Prime Minister John Key had organised for the Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister of Samoa to come to an impromptu lunch without an agenda the day before the tsunami, so that they were safe, but all of the relatives were killed. So this was mass murder by John Key, and it was also by the Security Intelligence Service, because they came around to see me about a week beforehand to say, oh, where's your daughter going on holiday? Because, you know, basically we want to kill you all. So they were in on it, and Internal Affairs might have been in on it. The New Zealand Air Force was in on it. They sent the rescue plane, which went from Auckland, and all they had to do was roll off the presidential suite and roll in the medical suite, and that takes about an hour, right? And then all they had to do was fly for 4.5 hours to Samoa. It took them 4 days to get there. And they decided halfway there that they needed to go to Sydney, which was further away, for some plane maintenance. And it was only myself and daughter's mother's boyfriend who was harassing them on the phone to actually talk to them, to actually get the New Zealand Air Force to pick them up, because after 5 days, septicemia sets in and they're all dead. And some of them had sticks through their body and sticks through the face, and, you know, not pretty. So we're talking about mass murder, and, you know, Paul Gagan, who's head of the Catholic Inquisition, and using the family court as the medium to achieve those ends, was part of this. So Peter Eldridge Williams and Roger Douglas were behind Centrepoint. And Centrepoint was a commune, basically, had between 150 and 250 people living in it, and it started in 1978. And Roger Douglas blamed me as starting it, but I was 5 hours drive away. I was going to school. I didn't have a car. I didn't have a cell phone. Cell phones didn't exist. So that's called misrepresentation, estoppel by misrepresentation. So he's misrepresenting me to take the focus off him as having started it. Now, I was the first person to expose Centrepoint as a government operation. And there was one security intelligence service agent and 4 internal affairs agents living there at any one time. I didn't know who they were, but I had some suspicions. When I lived there, I was 19 and 20 years old, from 8th of May to the 8th of May. And my girlfriend was an American field service scholar living there. So I was the first person to expose that Centrepoint was a government operation. But the person, about 12 years after I left, I got charged for pedophilia. And the people that exposed the pedophilia was Deborah and her boyfriend Peter. And Deborah was an ex-girlfriend of Eric Clapton. And Peter was really good on the guitar as well. So they managed to bring it down, and I managed to expose it as a government operation. Now, the reason I was there is because when I was growing up with the possessed Mandy Hallett, Amanda Pink, and she was completely possessed. She had about 40 different entities in her, and they would just do, and then one would stick. And you could have 3 different entities in one sentence. You know, it's just absolutely bizarre, and it was really disturbing. It's always really disturbing. And we called her the fishwife because she's just horrible to be around. It's really horrible and unsettling to be around. So we kicked her out when she was 14. I was 12. But this was 1973, and this was actually the same year as The Exorcist, right? And for me, The Exorcist was a home movie, right? So Mandy Hallett, she'd be playing the piano, and then she'd just start making these sounds like a hanged man. I might have mentioned this before. And then up in the corner of the room, above the door, there'd be this, because I can see things a bit, there'd be this hanged man. And then she'd get possessed by this hanged man, and she'd just be making all sorts of bizarre noises and bizarre actions, you know. She goes from playing the piano quite well to just like, and so the parents would grab her and then take her to the bed and hold her down, literally. And it was exactly like The Exorcist. And then The Omen came out in '76, and that was also a bit of a home movie. So my elder sister, Mandy Pink, was like The Exorcist and The Omen and the Antichrist. She was like an Antichrist, right? I still don't know her because she's so possessed, you know. And as she's getting older, her chin and nose are growing together. I think I might have said this before. You know? Yeah, it's kind of a wicked, literally a wicked. So none of this came up with Charlie Ward doing his interviews. He was just out to slander me because I had such a good case for I still do, claim to the throne, having the coronation stone, and you've got the sword of the Duke of Saxon, Coburg and Gotha, and the Holy Grail, and the lineage, and their lineage is fake, and my lineage is real, and I'm descended from Queen Anne Boleyn, who escaped, and Walter Raleigh, who was Queen Anne Boleyn's grandson, etc. And Walter Raleigh drew Rosicrucian cosmography, which showed me living in a cave in Portugal, and named me, and actually also drew this landscape around here, at the back here. So I had a far better claim, and I was born on the right days, you know, 10th to the 15th of September, to actually make the true claim to the throne. What Centrepoint was good for is it had a psychology department, which was upstairs above the kitchen dining area, just to the side of Don's drafting area. He used to design all the buildings there, Board and Batten. He's a good designer. And then, so on Sundays, they would all meet, all these psychologists would meet. Some of them were maybe government psychologists running the whole place as an experiment. And I was sitting in with them as this 19 and 20-year-old. And the psychology that was there was 3 years ahead of the high street, whatever was on the high street. So in 1981, I was watching Milton Erickson hypnosis videos. So all of that stuff that I was learning really helped me to deal with the KGB and the CIA and all that sort of stuff. So I was at Centrepoint from 1981 to 82. I left there, and then Coca-Cola came out to New Zealand and ran a competition for the Drink and Work for Coke, you know, that. And I was first up out of 500 guys, and I won it. So that kind of made me a symbol and gave me bragging rights in America. So then I went to America, and I got picked up by esoteric CIA, and then taken to Patmos to see if Revelation was run there. I was one of those 40 people to be tested for that. And then I met them in West Berlin and East Berlin, and went to Budapest and ran some stuff, and then went to Moscow. And I was really just sort of doing my thing and fulfilling my predictions. I wasn't on any particular side. I was just getting a result to see if I could drop the Berlin Wall, and sure enough, it came down. And I've got the inside story on that, which I'll tell in another interview. So, you know, that was one good thing that came out of Centrepoint. Me, I was just there for a year, and my girlfriend, being an American Field Service scholar at the same time, was, you know, fortuitous for America. And then Walter Raleigh was actually given North America in 1584, 1586, and 1591, and then that passed down the Marquess of Pembroke line to me, and that's the only title that can be passed down in an illegitimate line. It doesn't have to be legitimate. Most of it is, but a few bits are less recorded in marriage, and a few bits are in the New Forest, where the records were a bit organic. So Charlie Ward didn't bring up any of that stuff. Dave Mahoney didn't bring up any of that stuff because they were actually catch and release and Mossad agents and Jesuits, and actually co-adjusting my story for themselves and stealing all of my numbers, including my list of names, in order to destroy my story and make it their own. So what Dave Mahoney did in parts 5 and 6 is he was talking about these kings of Portugal that I'd never mentioned, and he was getting everything wrong. And then M Seeker of Truth, who calls himself M Seeker, or M, who's M for midget, M for MI5, Prince Charles bought him a house from the Northern Bank robbery, laundered money through Elephant Family, which was started by Mark Shand, who's Camilla Parker Bowles' brother. And Camilla Parker Bowles' ex-husband actually ran the Northern Bank robbery on 20th of December 2004. And his name's Brigadier Andrew Henry Parker Bowles, and his business partner Ted Cunningham was actually convicted of the bank robbery and had to return £3.03 million. And no one else was charged. One guy's brother was killed, and then he was charged, and then he was released after 5 years because there's absolutely no evidence against him. So then they had to charge someone, so they charged Ted Cunningham. But they didn't charge Andrew Henry Parker Bowles because he was kind of Prince Charles' brother-in-law, you know. Prince Charles was using the Northern Bank robbery money to fund M and bought him a house, and he also bought Justiz a house. It's M Secret Truth, who's like a 4'10.5" midget. So I think M stands for midget, and he's been completely silent since I've exposed him. And they also got Justiz to talk about him. He's a black Muslim dope smoker, and Prince Charles also bought him a house in Devon. So they're on the Charlie Ward show talking about me, and Dave Mahoney is doing an episode under the banner of the Hidden King talking about kings of Portugal and saying this is what I've said, and it's not what I've said at all. And then they bring M on and Justiz on to say, no, Gregory Hallett's got it all wrong. But I didn't say any of those things. Mahoney said those things, and then M and Justiz criticized me instead of Mahoney, because Mahoney was a deep state agent, and he's catch and release. He's drug trafficking, from flying planes from Colombia into North America, and he got caught, but because he's a Jesuit, he got let off, but he's catch and release now, so he's not allowed in North America, and he has to bear false witness against people in order to not be convicted of the crime. It's called bearing false witness. So, I was quite stunned with all of this. And just to clear up another thing, people say I'm QAnon. I'm nothing to do with QAnon at all. QAnon is different from Q. QAnon is a CIA disinfo campaign, whereas Q is a series of quite scientific predictions. I've never had any email contact with QAnon, nor been on their website, just nothing at all. And then Charlie Ward, the Mossad agent, twice now he's published in the newspapers, Joseph Gregory Hallett, big dash QAnon activist, because Charlie Ward is a disinfo agent. And whenever you see you got an N dash, and then you've got an M dash, and when you've got a really long dash, that means what follows is a lie. So Charlie Ward used this big M dash to allude that I was QAnon. I'm not QAnon. It seems to be run by a thalidomide in a wheelchair in Malaysia. Now, one other thing is when they went to the cave, they raided the cave and took stuff out of it and didn't show it on the film. And one of the things they took was this long stick and these two boulders about this big, right, with green fish netting around them. And then I would use those as weights. And then they introduced this new woman, Claire, and then she took it and then took it back to her place where they were doing some filming. And then they showed me the stick of timber and the two rocks wrapped in the fish netting. But they didn't show it in the movie because in the bottom right-hand corner of the Rosicrucian cosmography, which predicts me, it's sitting there, right? So that was another mark, and I'm still waiting to get a photo of those. So let me see if I forgot anything else. That's about it, really. So enjoy and be warned. Those guys, Charlie Ward and Dave Mahoney, not to be trusted. Lee Hemington, don't trust them at all. And these guys sabotage my numbers, sabotage my listings, sabotage my video views, and sabotage my reputation. And when they say, "Oh, we promoted you," they didn't promote me at all. I had all the listings and income coming in from donations and big hits before them. So you got a bell curve, you know. So I was getting donations for the first time in about 20 years. And bell curve usually goes like this, just like that, you know, like that. Nice, gentle shape. My bell curve goes like this. So during that period, for about 2 days, I was getting about 400 quid a day in donations, and then they just killed it, right? And then they brought in Just His to say that I was earning huge amounts of money. I wasn't. I got less than £10,000. £5,000 of that was from book sales, and £3,500 went towards buying a 3-year lease on a data server, which once I bought it, I was then told that it wouldn't do videos, so it was completely pointless and a waste of money. So I ended up with about 1,500 quid maybe. Yeah, so I've just finished 13 books, British Frauds on England's History, covering Queen Anne Boleyn's Great Escape, Sir Walter Raleigh, Queen Anne Boleyn's grandson, Sir Walter Raleigh versus Francis Bacon, the first cousins for Shakespeare, alligator versus crocodile, how they were introduced to North America in 1953. How North America was actually given to Walter Raleigh, so gifting North America to Walter Raleigh forever. Queen Elizabeth gifts North America to Walter Raleigh forever, which then passed to me. And Magna Carta frauds. Magna Carta frauds King John didn't know about. Magna Carta frauds of the 1600s, Magna Carta frauds of the 1700s, and what was the one? King John's concession to the Pope, which was just a complete fraud. And then the Bayeux Tapestry was a complete fraud. It was created in 1719 to 1727, and then the patents of the Bayeux Tapestry fraud, and then how to become the Pope and own the world. And during that time, Queen Elizabeth tried to marry me in 18th of March 2017, and then 3 years later, Pope Francis abdicated his title, Vicar of Christ, to me. He named Joseph Gregory on Easter Friday 2020. And then since then, there's some pretty reasonably clear images of Pope Francis wearing a mask, not looking like Pope Francis at all, and actually stretching the face off, you know. So all of it's come to pass, but people can't believe it. And there's so many catch and release agents around. There's 150,000 catch and release agents in England, right? People who have done crimes and been convicted, and then that's kind of been suppressed and they've never been sentenced, as long as they bear false witness against friends, relatives, and colleagues. And that's really where we're at. So we've got absolutely no values. We've no longer got a court of record. So we're looking at a society with no values, which is the Jesuit modality for taking over the world. So this is www.info info at kingof.uk or kingof.uk, and the website is kingjohn3rd.uk. So get yourself a book and nut down and get to the nitty gritty and get to the good stuff. I've just been talking about all the bad stuff that's been happening in the background. These people are nasty, man. Like, really nasty. I like to call them friends, but no, nasty.